Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck, and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week, the effect pedal that arrived from outer space. Literally. Now, it's a widely recounted, albeit apocryphal tale within the guitar community that the Univibe was developed to recreate the sound of a rotating Leslie speaker. However, in an interview a few years ago, its Japanese designer Fumio Mida revealed that it was actually inspired by this sound. Now, believe it or not, that is actually the sound of Radio Moscow. During the Cold War, radio played an incredibly important role in the ideological confrontation between East and West as a means of penetrating the Iron Curtain, and as such, its signal was ludicrously strong, so as to have the widest possible reach. So strong, in fact, that a young Fumio could actually pick it up across various frequencies in his native Akihabara, Tokyo, some 5,000 miles away from Moscow, except that by the time that the signal had reached Tokyo, reflecting from the Earth's ionosphere, which varies in height throughout the course of the day, it had caused a fluctuation in pitch, phase, and volume. Fumio loved this idiosyncratic sound and set about designing a device that could recreate this effect, going through various prototypes in an attempt to recreate the fading sound, as he put it, before eventually designing the Psychedelic Machine for Japanese electronics company Honey. The Psychedelic Machine was a dual effect, offering the new mood effect, would later be renamed as Univibe, and a fuzz, which could be used either independently or in combination, which Fumio, its designer, at the very least thought was essential if you were truly trying to recreate the sound of Radio Moscow. Incidentally, Psychedelic Machine has reached new levels of notoriety in recent years when it was finally unveiled or unmasked as the enigmatic, mysterious effect that John Mayer had used on the solo in I Guess I Just Feel Like. The mood effect would in turn become the Vibra chorus, which was produced in incredibly small quantities until March of 1969 when Honey would go bankrupt, at which point manufacturing of the now renamed Univibe that we know and love was taken over by Japanese electronics company Shin Ei. Fast forward to August 18th of that very same year, 1969, and Jimi Hendrix would take to the stage at Woodstock armed with a 68 Strat, a wall of Marshalls, a Dallas Arbiter Fuzzface, a Vox Wah, and of course a Shin Ei Uni-Vibe, thus cementing the effects place in the great pantheon of guitar effects pedals. So how did Fumio set about recreating the sound of Radio Moscow? Now the answer also provides the reason as to why these original devices, as with this one very kindly loaned to me a few years ago by Mark Pontin, a good mate of mine and a fantastic guitar player, not only cost so much these days, but are a nightmare to accurately recreate. They're photocells. A Univibe contains 4 photocells, which are in turn triggered by the flashing of a very small bulb, the speed of which being controlled by the external foot switch that came with the Univibe. However, the production of CDS photocells, cadmium sulfide, now presents something of a dilemma, at least within Europe, thanks to RoHS, the restriction of hazardous substances, meaning that pedals that will be created en masse in vast quantities struggle to use truly accurate components. Couple that with photocells being a nightmare for inconsistency and hard to find one suitable for pedal manufacture, and you really do have a perfect storm for a pedal that is extremely hard to accurately recreate. Fortunately for us, there are a small handful of incredibly good recreations of those original devices, one of which being the brand new ER-2 from Thorpy FX that you heard in the intro jam of today's video that, while staying true to the original, also irons out some of its kinks, such as its massive footprint, but crucially retains that signature throb and syrupy, almost liquid swirl and magic of those original devices. So what came next for the Univibe? Now, needless to say, after Jimi Hendrix put it to such incredible use at Woodstock in '69, particularly notably on his anti-Vietnam War rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, the effect experienced an explosion in popularity. Jimmy would really cement his synonymity with the pedal with Machine Gun, with the Band of Gypsies, but following his passing, the next real notable use of a Univibe would come some 4 years later in 1973 on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon on the track Breathe. However, for the subsequent tour, David Gilmour would actually replace the Univibe with a Phase 90, an MXR Phase 90, which over the years has led to some confusion over the sound of a Univibe and the sound of a phaser. Robin Trow would of course also become synonymous with the Univibe on his 1974 track Bridge of Sighs. However, in the years that followed, as the original units became scarcer and simply tastes and effects changed, the Univibe had all but disappeared by the mid-1980s. This would change, however, in the early 90s with the introduction of the rack-mounted Black Cat Vibe. And as such, the Univibe would experience yet another explosion in popularity, this time round finding favour with the likes of Scott Henderson, Steve Lukather, Eric Johnson, Michael Landau, and perhaps most notably in this time frame, Trey Anastasio from Fish, who is widely associated with the effect. With its newfound popularity, there was an explosion of boutique-built Univibe clones, and as demand grew, it wouldn't be long until the big boys would get involved. JHS, Fulltone, MXR, TC Electronic, Electro Harmonics, Jam, Voodoo Lab, even Shin Ei started producing the Univibe for the first time since the 70s, a few years ago. In more recent times, the likes of Strymon and Line 6 have had their say with digital recreations of the Univibe, with the Mobius and Helix respectively. Now, I can't speak for the Mobius, but if you've been a long-time viewer of Friday Fretworks, you will have definitely heard me put in the Helix recreation of the Univibe to use in the past, and I'll include that on the outro of today's video. Of course, there have been more recent examples of the Univibe being put to great use, one of which springs to mind being Parvana by Doyle Bramall II, taken from his 2018 album Shades, but for the most part, I really don't think it would be unfair to say that the Univibe is an effect whose legacy was cemented in a very short period of time by just a handful of very high-profile musicians. And I guess therein lies its true magic. Arguably more so than any other effect, the Univibe has the power to evoke the spirit of such an historically and culturally rich moment in time. The sound of Woodstock, the sound of anti-Vietnam protests, and the sound of a guitarist that I think many people still believe arrived from outer space, much like the sound of a Univibe, funnily enough. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already. I'm going to play you out now, but I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.